everyone. Welcome back to This Week in Guns. It's powered by Second Amendment Foundation. It's brought to you by the Patriot Patch Company, the VZ Grips Corporation, the MAF Corporation, and Primary Arms. This show offers commentary on the latest firearms industry news, information, and buzz. I'm your host, Matthew LaRosiere, and I'm joined today by what's become our usual special guest. And I know many of you are audio listeners, and that's great. It means you don't have to suffer what I put the video people through. But I was talking about how when people complain about whatever the rat is doing, I tend to make it worse. And I think that you guys have been trying to do reverse psychology on me. Well, I'm about to tell you, I don't actually know how that works. So without further ado, let me just introduce you all to Mr. Ivan.
Hello, it's me, the special guest. My appearance isn't special because it's out of the ordinary. It's special because I am.
So how is it in the transdimensional portal?
It's really good. I'm hopped up on Mountain Dew and Gamer Girl bathwater. I'm doing great.
Now, this Gamer Girl bathwater, have you been able to confirm the source?
I have been able to confirm the source. It's just regular tap water, but expensive.
Wow.
The Gamer Girlness comes purely through the packaging. It's disappointing.
Well, that's good. All right, let's move on to our first story. And this is actually something Mr. Ivan himself did a little bit of a investigative snoopy-dooping on, didn't you?
I did. So we talked about a couple of weeks ago, the ATF had their great big report that they did because of some funding. Because of some funding that they got from some lizard for some reason.
Yes.
And, you know, much like whenever the CDC last had money to do reporting on guns and gun crime, they found a lot of stuff that was surprisingly founded, put more foundation behind pro-gun arguments than anti-gun arguments, which is kind of interesting.
Yes.
But this particular report, this particular section, the ATF's whole report is massive, but this particular section had to do with crimes and crime gun tracing. Yeah. So in the gist of it is whenever a gun shows up at a crime scene for state or local level things, the police departments are usually, if a gun's recovered, will send that gun in to the ATF with data. So essentially the serial number on the gun, the caliber, gauge, or the model, and these sorts of things. And the ATF will use that to try and trace the gun to find if they can find out where it was first sold, and then trace from where it was first sold to how it got there, which they claim is for stopping gun trafficking, but we all know how well that works in practice, as well as other things, right? So that's sort of what they're there to find. But the interesting thing about this data, a couple key points I took away is, on the notion of ghost guns, which is guns that the ATF can't trace, can't trace to a first owner. It turns out half as many. So there's somewhere around 50,000 guns that from 2017 to 2021 the ATF had trace requests for that had the serial numbers removed. Slightly more than half that many guns were guns that were sold to police officers with what's known as a letterhead exemption. Right. So if a police officer has a letter from their police department that says this guy is buying a gun for his job, he doesn't have to do a background check. But because that background check never happened, if that gun later gets sold as like a cop buyback or a cop trade-in gun, and the ATF runs the serial number, they have no initial point of sale, and there's no requirements to keep that letterhead if you're an FFL. Some states may stipulate otherwise, but federally, they don't have you keep that letterhead. So that makes the guns effectively untraceable. While, of course, there may still be a paper trail that exists, there's nothing that makes that paper trail exist. So
let's just take a step back here. On this report, they were looking at, they were backwards looking at firearms that had been traced, right?
Yep.
And so this that I have up here, the information we're talking about here, were all firearms that could not be traced to a purchaser. The total is about 25% of the guns they attempted to trace.
Correct.
Right. So the largest, and of course they're always talking about ghost gun, right? So the largest number of those here was the cops just simply did not give enough information. That's
They punch the model in wrong or put the serial number in the caliber and the caliber in the serial number. And then the ATF looks at this and goes, 9mm, not the serial number.
Right. And then shortly after that, at 95,000 guns, is where the FFL just didn't have it in their A&D books. And that could be because it was, too old and they had retired these books, presumably given them back to the ATF or whatever. Following that, at 66,000 guns, was pre-68 firearms or otherwise firearms too old to trace.
I would not have assumed that number would be that high. That was another one that surprised me because if you compare that to like guns that are just too old to have their records, like there's a lot of pre-68s being used for very well. Of course, I should preface, and not necessarily nefarious things, because a crime gun could be a totally lawfully possessed M1 carbine in the state of California. If you're caught with that, and then it's not registered as an assaulty weapon, or you have the big mags with it, they will say that you're now breaking the law and in possession of a gun, and then that becomes a crime gun because they'll run a trace on it. So the number of crime guns doesn't necessarily mean it was like an actual real crime. Or whatever. Right. It can be state level crime.
So then after that, we have obliterated serial number, 48,000 guns. Government law enforcement, right? You were just talking about 26,000. And then we have other at 66,000. So where did they include PMFs, privately made firearms, in this?
They did include it in another section later, and it's a much smaller number.
What was that number? Do you have it here?
Scroll down, it shows up. Oh, this was another interesting one, but we can touch on that. There's your PMFs.
Oh wow, total.
It's much less.
Total recovered and traced. So this isn't just those they couldn't get back to a guy. Total 19,000. Yeah. So 5,000 less than the amount of guns that were untraceable because cops.
And that is 2017 to 21 versus just 2021, but that's still a lot of guns. Right. They're saying the scourge of ghost guns. Well, there's a very comparable number of
2017 was only 1,600 guns. Right? Even if you add it up, it's comparable.
Right. There's a very close number of quote unquote ghost guns that are just like cops got tired of shooting themselves with SIG 320s, and so they wanted to change. And so, other little interesting factoids in this was that states that have stricter gun laws have much less successful time tracing guns, which you may think is contradictory because most of these states have, some version of handgun registry, like, California, and I think Michigan may also have you have to register handguns thing. Yep. So like these states and these states end up having less success tracing crime guns when they show up, which would suggest that the state's
lowest percentage trace to purchaser: Hawaii 60.1, California 61.9, New Jersey 65.6, New York 66.2, Connecticut 66.5. Those are the bottom 5.
Right, and then
highest,
looking at
highest 80, Wisconsin, South Carolina, Georgia, Ohio, and Alabama.
All around like 84% success in tracing. So these states with more lax gun laws, and of course some of this is going to be biased because of the thing I said earlier, right? Like those states that have crappy gun laws are going to have more people who end up being got for having guns.
Right. And the other interesting thing here is that they've talked about a large increase in gun traces, right? And then just coyly mentioned that, it's because we started really begging them to send us all the guns for tracing. Correct.
Yeah, they've made more pushes, especially with PMFs recently, where earlier, like if a gun didn't have a serial number, the ATF was like, don't you'll submit the lack of serial number to them, and they're like, we can't do anything with this.
All right, so let me just read your takeaways. Gun tracing by serial number is not like on TV shows. That's true. Cops themselves are to blame for a surprising number of untraceable guns. That's true. States with strict gun laws have less success in tracing guns. AR-15s are very rare as crime guns. Even though many states ban their possession, they show up rarely despite being very common. Pistols make up the vast majority of crime guns. A sizable number of ghost guns submitted to ATF are just Glock switches and the like.
Yeah, like the ATF
they consider the switch itself the firearm.
The ATF is padding their number of quote-unquote ghost gun recoveries in a very significant way just with machine gun conversion devices.
Right, and we're going to talk about that little tidbit a little more later in the show. This information is usually submitted for any gun the cops come across in a crime, including violations of state law. An AR-15 possessed in violation of California's assault weapon ban would be a crime gun even if no one was hurt by it. And once ATF receives that information, they can cross-reference it with the gun's point of origin and go there to the point where the firearm was first sold, the first retail purchaser.
So if you go down, there's a very interesting breakdown by caliber and model that was, like from the FBI statistics, we already know that rifles are very uncommon when it comes to violent crimes, but the actual recovery in crime guns alone is a very, very interesting breakdown.
Right. So 68% pistols.
Yeah. For you guys listening, you should take a guess now what the most common caliber for a pistol crime gun is, and then take a guess at the most common caliber for a rifle crime gun is. Because the pistol might not surprise you, but I bet the rifle does surprise you.
Put that answer in the comments.
Yeah, drop in the comments.
Yeah,
right
put in
now.
the doobly doo. So yeah, 68% pistol in crime guns, 12.4% rifle, 11% revolver, 1.7% other unknown. All right, so top 10 calibers of trace pistols. I'm actually I'm surprised, and I remember talking to you about this.
50% is 9mm handguns.
50% 9mm handguns. Followed distantly at 17% with 40, then 12% 380, 10% 45, 5% 22, which is shocking to me.
That is very shocking.
2.5% 25, which is like, yeah, get in there, boys. Then 32, 7.62, 10mm, which, so we've got a total of 7,000 10mm crime guns. That's big. And 7,556. And so the interesting thing about 7.62 is that that's going to include both. That's going to include 308, by 39, and Tokarev.
Yep.
And possibly even some 32s, depending on how the cops write it down.
And so the other interesting thing here is that I've heard it argued by anti-gun people, like whenever you bring up the violent crime statistic of rifles are rare in crime, they'll say, but AR-15 pistols exist, and that would be classified as a pistol. So haha, AR-15s are super common because look at all these pistol violent crimes. And then you look at the number of crime guns, and a whopping 0.5%, half of 1 single percent are N556, and then another 0.5% are in the other calibers that you might think an AR-15 would be in.
Right.
So AR-15s are like very, very rare as far as pistols in crime guns. And then when it comes to rifles, rifles just as it are.
So rifles, very, very this uncommon. Is unsurprising to me. Yeah. So the number one by a long shot at 30%, 70,000 guns is 22 LR or just 22 in general, followed distantly by 5.56 at 13.2, 7.62 at 11.8, then 2.23 at 8.9. So I guess we could say it's a total of about 20% that are in 5.56.
Yep.
And then multi-cal, 4.4%, 30-06, 3.6%, 308, 3.3%, 30-30, 3%, 9mm, 2.7, and 270, 1.7%.
270 and 30 don't make any sense there.
I'm very annoyed that, well, I guess 5.45 guns are just not that common yet.
Right.
Okay, so now let's talk about the top 5 manufacturers of traced pistols.
Again, and this is not surprising at all. So if I were to have guessed this, I would have got 4 of the 5 correct.
Yes.
I would have guessed Glock, Smith & Wesson, Ruger, and Taurus.
Yeah, I think I had some slightly different guesses.
My 5th would have been High Point, which is wrong, actually.
Right. So we got number 1, Glock, 19.6%. Number 2, Smith & Wesson, 14%. Number 3, Taurus, 12.2%. Number 4, Sturm Ruger, 8.7%. And number 5, HS Product. That's right, you Springfield idiots. They know the actual manufacturer.
Homies are going crazy with their XDs.
Yeah, my XD boys wilding.
The XD boys managed to beat High Pointers.
Now the rifles, this is very interesting.
Now this actually blew me away, and I did get something wrong on the Twitter thread here. It turns out 3 of these companies actually make ARs. It's just that only one of them makes a large number of them, and only
Ruger.
And 2. Yeah, Ruger makes a lot of ARs, right? Remington used to, doesn't anymore. Right. Savage Arms has like a boutique line of ARs, and I have never seen one in person. Like they do make them. But
yeah, and I think they're like weird calibers.
Yeah, they do have them in the sort of weird hunty calibers that Savage has sort of cornered as their niche.
But we certainly, and I had guessed. So anyway, let's say the top 5 here. Number 1, Marlin.
Which makes sense if you understand first that 22 long rifle is the most common. Marlin's not a bad guess.
No, and also I thought that Savage would be more common. just because of the sheer number of Sears and other guns that Savage produced for other companies. But so, yeah, we got number 1, Marlin. Number 2, Sturm Ruger, 21,378. Very close second to Marlin. Number 3, Remington, 17,700. Number 4, Savage Arms, 14,911. And number 5 at Winchester, 12,083. So that's just super interesting data here.
And then the top 10 crime guns by broad type and manufacturer. So like Glock 17, 19, 26, blah blah blah. Those are all Glock 9mm for this category. Yeah. So for the top 10 guns, there is not a single rifle, and none of them are AR-15s.
Yep.
Like not even AR-15 pistols, right? And so despite the fact that AR-15s are so broadly sold, in fact, AR-15s number higher than some of these pistols in terms of sales for sure. AR-15s are just grossly underrepresented as crime guns and in violent crimes.
But rocking the top 10, Florida boys, SCCY Industries 9mm pistol at number 9.
They beat out High Point somehow.
Yeah, boys. We did it. I've actually got one right here in its little box. Yeah,
but it's essentially there. It's just a Venn diagram overlap of the most common guns by those 5 companies: your Glock, Ruger, Smith and Wesson, and HS Product for some reason.
Yeah, boys, let's rep it. I bought this one at a pawn shop because it reminded me of Miku. It's steel and silver. I think I gave like $100 for it.
But like the 10th highest gun there is a 380 handgun.
That would certainly be the Ruger. It'd certainly be the LCP. Yeah. So let's look at this. Purchase. So
this one was This one was ultra confusingly worded. Like I ended up like typing out what this meant 3 different times because I kept like being confused by it. So if you remember earlier, we said 25% of guns couldn't be traced to somebody. This is talking about just the 75% of guns that can be traced to a first purchaser. Mm-hmm. So what it's talking about is, so now that you know who the purchaser is, what do you learn about that gun in its relation to the crime? So what they found out is that in 58% of instances, so let's say you know who the purchaser is, right?
So that would be the first retail purchaser, the person that the trace drops you.
There is a background check tied to this gun's serial number that still exists. In 58% of those cases, that background check, the name on that background check, is not the guy who possessed the crime gun. Mm-hmm. In 12% of cases, it is the guy. Like the guy's name on the background check is the guy who was in possession of the gun. And in
30% of cases, you found the first purchaser, but you have no idea.
Right. Yeah. In 30% of cases, there was a name on the background check, but you don't know who owned the gun. And this is the case of like a gun dropped at a crime scene, or like you do a drug bust on a house and no one's willing to say it's their gun.
Well, so hold on. So remember this now. They're going to say, oh, look at how effective tracing is, right? Because they're going to say that of these 75%, 70% resulted in knowing who the possessor was. You're forgetting that
you know who the possessor is.
No, when they do a trace, they have the gun.
Right, they have usually the gun because they got it. Possessor is.
Yeah, usually because they got it from the guy. So that means that in this data, that is overwhelmingly situations where they got it from the guy. In 30% of cases, they still couldn't figure out who the guy was.
Right.
So that's just really, it really is not very useful. And here's where we get the obliterated serial numbers.
So this was just a wild, like out. I don't know, like if I was at the ATF, right, and you realize people working at the ATF are generally kind of anti-gun and/or they want more restrictions on these sorts of things, I would not have included this because they had a great big section on how time to crime is decreasing. And that's an internal statistic they've had for a long time where they look at the average amount of time it takes from a time a gun is sold till the time a gun is used in a big crime that they get notified about. And so the thing that they found out is that guns that have their serial numbers removed are less likely to be used in a crime, in a crime within 3 years, than guns that have a serial number not removed, which is a mind-boggling thing to think about. Because, the whole thing is like guns with their serial numbers taken off are ultra criminal and they're the worst and they're terrible because nobody can trace it. Here.
It's it's about double. If your gun has a serial number, it's about twice as likely to be used within 3 years of the sale.
Which is just like it's a really weird statistic to think about. And maybe it's explained away by the sorts of criminals who will use guns in criminal ways aren't smart enough to remove serial numbers, perhaps. But like when a gun is submitted to the ATF as having an obliterated serial number, it doesn't go into the has a serial number category if they can recover the serial number.
Right.
If it's obliterated at all, it goes in the obliterated category. If you remove one number from it with a Dremel tool and they can still figure out what that number was, they still consider it an obliterated serial number. And for some reason, those guns are less likely to be used quickly in crime than guns that have their serial numbers intact, which is like, it's the absolute backwards case of their justification.
Perhaps not. Because perhaps the chain of custody is tighter in a newer gun, right? Perhaps, and again, a lot of these crimes are likely because we just don't have that much violent crime in the United States to justify this amount of traces. So I'm curious to know what percentage of these crimes were simple possessory crimes.
Right.
Like simple felon in possession, or you're in a state that says it's bad type crimes.
That's true. But
so I think it might be explicable.
Just the interesting thing though is the ATF is going to, or Department of Justice is going to be arguing here, I think in the next month, that possessing a gun with a defaced serial number should continue to be a felony because it's more likely to be used in crime. Well, there's also this report that says that maybe not. Other than possession of the gun with the defaced serial number.
Well, at least within 3 years. So
right, at least within 3 years.
So, and again, it's not a question of whether or not they can prove it. It's a question of whether or not there's a historically analogous regulation. And being that serial numbers weren't even a common practice the way they are now until 1968. So yeah, before 1968, manufacturers put numbers on their guns, but they were just
for internal reference.
Yes, it was. And oftentimes they
duplicated the same number.
And, yeah, because it didn't matter.
It was more like
just wanted to know vaguely when you made it.
Yeah.
And look at M1 Garands.
Yes.
The serial number is worthless.
Right, because different companies would have them and they would re-arsenal them and re-serial them, and it's a little bit of a mess. And it is funny that whenever
didn't Springfield Armory do 50,000 guns with the same serial number on purpose?
I believe that's the case
because they knew they were sending some to Winchester and etc. Yeah.
Whenever this question of serial numbers was first argued by a court, the analog laws that Department of Justice brought up is that there was a state law in Maryland that said that you have to put this is how you put barrel proofing marks on a barrel. And they're saying that that's analogous to the 1968 era serial number regulations. And I hate to break it to them, but man, that sure isn't. The state of Maryland saying,
that was Maryland saying, hey, stop selling guns that blow people up.
Right. If you claim it's 12 gauge and you mark it being safe with 12 gauge, you have to do this in order to prove that. That's what that law says. It had nothing to do with serial numbers at all.
Yep. The whole concept of serialization, people think it's magic. I remember when I was showing those 3D printed guns to those French reporters.
Yeah.
And I had a VZ61 and printed, and they just go, oh, but it has a serial number. I was like, well, no, that's that part has a number, but it's
the upper having its original arsenal number or whatever.
Well, it has the last four of its original
on the upper, right?
Which is just so that you keep the parts together,
right?
And I kept explaining this to them, but they kept taking photos of the numbers. And I'm like, why?
If you try and run that number, it comes back nothing ever.
Yeah.
It comes back a gun that was never imported because the gun was destroyed before it was imported.
Right. It's anyway, people just think that if there's a number on a gun, it's magic.
Numbers have magic powers. It's true.
They do. So we're talking more about Fed nonsense. We've got this. You remember a while ago there was that omnibus crime prevention thing, right? Which promised to just waste our money.
It stopped all the crime.
Yeah, no, it stopped all the crime, and it's because we're spending a little bit less money on missiles, bombs, and various ways of delivering them to, poor brown people on the other side of the world, where apparently our freedoms are somehow.
Right, our freedoms got lost there on their way home.
So we need to blow them up. So they got to find ways to use all this money because, you know, if they don't use more money than they have, then they won't be able to
get more next year. Yeah.
Do it good. Yeah. So the Justice Department is giving $231 million for red flag laws and gun violence prevention, sending out more than $200 million to help states and the District of Columbia administer red flag laws and other crisis intervention programs as part of the landmark bipartisan gun legislation passed by Congress over the summer. Some of this funding, why do they always have to announce Tuesday?
They can't not.
You know, they have to always, you have to always let you know how long ago everything was. The 5th anniversary of the deadly school shooting in Parkland, Florida will also go to crisis intervention, court proceedings, and other gun violence reduction programs.
It's just kind of gross. They've got this much money to throw around that could solve an actual problem. And I don't know of a single instance you can point to, like a single state that has implemented red flag laws where on balance it has been a good thing or it has been helpful.
But hey, Attorney General Merrick Garland said the funding will help protect children, families, and communities across the country from senseless acts of gun violence.
You could set that money on fire and it would do more good for doing those things because at least everybody would be able to come together and warm themselves.
That's true. Wait, no, people generally get more violent when it's hot. So
we need to freeze all this money in blocks of ice.
Yeah. Red flag laws, also known as extreme risk prevention orders, are intended to temporarily remove guns from people with potentially violent behavior and prevent them from hurting themselves or others. 19 states in the District of Columbia have red flag laws. It's like, okay, what is the federal interest? Like, show me the legitimate source of constitutional authority to assist states in implementing an agenda that's inconsistent with the Bill of Rights.
No, you can't argue this. There's no way to be principled and argue this.
I don't know. Hold on. Let me think. Because there is no federal police power. So you'd like the only thing that they'd be able to rely on would be the commerce power. And we're talking about purely intrastate actions.
Yes.
So it's like even we're talking about using the commerce power to give aid to certain states for enforcing their own laws.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what Phil Byrne, like even the most tortured possible understanding of the Commerce Clause didn't say you could do this. But yeah, okay, yeah, sure, whatever. It's not a big deal. You should be able to spend federal tax dollars on whatever you want.
And here's this is my problem with Article 3 of our Constitution. It was a mistake.
Yes. Because
it's so hard to sue against something like this because there's no such thing as general taxpayer standing.
Yep.
So it's like, how you'd have to get unbelievably creative to sue about this. So basically, I think you'd have to be a state attorney general,
more or less,
or just like come up with some cockamamie Rube Goldberg device to give yourself standing to challenge this.
Get yourself red flagged.
Get yourself red flag and prove that it would have not been possible but for the federal government. Like, yeah, that's
and then take the feds in federal court over this thing that happened as a result of a state law.
Yeah, that they but for their so this is outrageous. So guys, we do have to amend the Constitution. We just have to dispense with the standing requirement entirely. And I know
you should be able to sue the feds anytime for anything ever
for no
reason because you pay taxes and that's it.
Right. And I know all of the second year law students out there in the audience are going to be like, but flood of litigation. I don't care. It's like, okay, that's what law professors will sit there and tell you because they know if you go out and you somehow, by some like miracle of science or the divine intervention of God, develop two brain cells out there in the world and start rubbing them together, you're going to see as a lawyer that it's very hard to bring lawsuits against the most obvious violations of law on the part of the government. And so there's going to be that little chip in the back of your brain going, oh, but if we don't have standing, then you could sue for the government for anything.
Wow. That's a good idea.
Correct. You won.
Wow, you could sue the government for anything they do wrong?
Eliminating Article 3 with respect to government defendants would not be an unbelievable issue. You don't have to get rid of injury requirements in all civil actions. And I know I'm probably boring the legs shut of half of the audience, but it's just I get so frustrated because people always say, nerdy people will ask me, what's the worst part of the Constitution? And they expect me to say something, right, classic or typical.
Right.
And I'm just like, no, Article 3. they fucked it up. But yeah, so that's stupid. Next up, we're going to talk about Washington. Rifle ban among gun control bills advancing in the Washington state legislature. So this is a trio of ambitious Democratic proposals to further regulate firearms. They've cleared a key early deadline to advance in the Washington legislature. Those bills would prohibit the sale or transfer of most semi-automatic rifles, mandate gun safety training through a permit-to-purchase program, and hold the firearm industry responsible in some cases of harm. So
this is I think we talked about this before, but it seems like after Bruin, all of the things that they'd been thinking about, in 5 to 10 years, we want to push in the states where we have leverage. They're just we have to do this now to buy themselves as much time as they can until maybe the composition of the Supreme Court changes. This seems so desperate from all of them pushing, they see what's going to happen in California and they see what's coming in Illinois where these bans will be struck down. So they're trying to ram through as many as they can so they can maybe jam things up as much as possible and sort of I guess fight, force this fight now rather than in 5 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
It all just seems so going to broke for for broke to me.
Oh, and if you guys are worried about that, don't forget to donate to my law firm's Second Amendment war chest. There will be a link down there. It's the Zerme LaRosiere 2A war chest. We are taking up this type of thing, but it is because it is hard to do all of this at once. And we will need coordinated action, which is going to be very difficult with the traditional gun rights. I don't even want to say community, right? Because it isn't. With everyone just fighting over first to file,
right?
It's you don't get much strategy. So it is going to take a lot of work to go after all this stuff. And I do think they are doing it on purpose because I think they're hedging their bet that if the Supreme Court does anything, it'll be narrow. Right. So they'll have they're playing a full deck. This thing. Oh, so what if you got rid of one of my Yu-Gi-Oh cards? I still got 17.
Right. You got mag bans. That's fine. We still have all these other things.
Right.
They're loath to have the Supreme Court really drop the hammer on them. So they have to they have to put as many troops in the field of battle as they possibly can by getting as many of these laws rammed through now, because the Supreme Court's going to have to clarify Bruin. That was clear. That was clear a week not even a week, the week that Bruin dropped, it was clear that Bruin was going to end up being clarified by the Supreme Court because New York was immediately trying to violate it.
Right. Well, it's not even a matter of clarification. It's active and intentional narrowing from below, right?
Right.
The lower courts are trying to read crap into it to narrow it. And so it's what the lower courts are saying is you have to be explicit, which the Supreme Court does not do.
Right. And so they'll force them to be as, they will take the route of being the least specific they possibly can and still get Bruin through, like McDonald was to Heller.
Right.
And so we're going to have something like that come down. And I think what the anti-gun groups are planning is that they're going to try and force that to be as narrow as it can be. Right. By having as much on the plate, as many pieces on the board as they possibly can. And I'm afraid that with the way that Bruin was worded, these sort of permit to purchase schemes for all guns, sort of like Illinois' FOID card, seems like something the Supreme Court would not say Like, I don't think the Supreme Court would find it unconstitutional based on the way that Bruin read. Like, of course, there's no history or tradition, blah, 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 but there's no history or tradition of carry licenses anyway. And they said that they can continue to have licensing schemes as long as it's shall issue, which isn't the best.
Well, that was specific to carry.
Specific to carry, true. Possession, right. They may, simple possession and purchase even, because, right, purchase is different than possession even. They may figure differently, but they seemed like they were okay with licensing schemes in general to me.
I'm not sure about that. I don't think it said that. I think the holding was intentionally narrow. And I think what it said is, here is your test. And your test is make it square with the history.
Right.
And that was impossible to do.
I hope the follow-up to Bruin, like, the most specific they get is they clearly lay out, like they tell you, this is what an analog is. This is how you find an analogous law under Bruin. And they reaffirm that the text history and tradition you're looking at is at these two periods in time and nowhere else and nowhere after. And it's not in the 1300s. Like, that's we're not our country wasn't founded.
They already did that though.
Right.
In Bruin.
Well, yeah, that's true. They were pretty firm on it in Bruin, but like they need to do it with the back of their hand.
The question is, what is analogous?
Right.
And that's going to be the big thing there.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway, guess what? Guess who re-upped their sponsorship?
Who?
VZGrips.com.
VZ Grips.
Yeah, you can join the Hyena Brown Coalition on VZGrips.com. Let's check them out. Let's check out that internet website on the net. Oh, search a keyword.
I almost bought a high-power parts kit that had VZ Grips as a part of the parts kit, which, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to put it on my printed frame or nothing, but it was still super cool.
I just searched best gun, and you could get a Cohen or a Chen shooter installed magwell for your 19 Lem.
I've that one's on the mainspring housing. That's actually kind of nifty. I've had one that just installs under the grips before, and it's kind of ugly from a design standpoint because it installs under the grips, and so the grips don't sit flush. But having the magwells on there is actually kind of nice.
Oh, that's the one you got.
That's one. The Wilson Combat one. Yeah,
the Wilson Combats. It's a lot cheaper.
It came in a parts kit that I got.
Well, there is a lot of stuff in here. I think I'm going to ask them next for one of these AR-15 grips.
Yeah, they do look super interesting.
They look really cool.
I could put it on an MP5. Tell them I'll put it on an MP5.
An MT5.
And yeah, an MT5.
Yeah, I'll say get the one that does the most damage to my body if I put it in an orifice.
I want to be able to grate my skin. That's how textured I want. Good.
In Hyena Brown. That's the color.
That's actually pretty trippy. I like that.
I got the short one. It's not shorty. Shorty is for little idiots. Get the standard one. But yeah, so that's cool. And if you go on there, you want to buy something, use code THISWEEK15, THISWEEK15. We will hook you up with a big discount. Oh, look at that. And they're on sale. The AR grips are on sale. I got to call them and ask for that. Okay. Moving on. Oh, this is another annoying bit of news. But there is one nice little thing in here. Look at the image that they picked. Who's
the Drake? Wait. Is that one of the 9mm Drakes?
Yeah, it's an AC-9, but it's still a Drake.
Points for attempting.
Yeah, almost Drake. Oregon overturned Second Amendment sanctuary law, and according to The Guardian, this is a blow to gun movement.
Oh no, a toothless law got overturned?
Right. So what this was is there was a Columbia County law, which is a conservative little oasis in Oregon, and it was your typical Second Amendment sanctuary thing, and an Oregon court said you can't do that. Deciding on Wednesday that local governments cannot ban police from enforcing certain gun laws in a ruling that could hold national ramifications for anti-gun control efforts. So yeah, let's see. An Oregon court.
The binding precedent of Oregon local courts.
Yeah, the binding preference of the Oregon District Court. Very cool. Oh no, yeah, Oregon State Court of Appeals. So like not so a mid-tier Oregon court. That's like, oh, that has the national, like, if you compare it to like international power, right? Like power on the international scale. This decision is like, you know, somebody who walks into the UN and says, I am the assistant prosecutor for Palm Beach County, Florida. Yeah. Yeah, the
walk
rural
into the
region
UN and say, I represent the country of Ohio.
The rural region was one of some 1,200 in the U.S. from Virginia to New Mexico to Florida to pass the Second Amendment sanctuary resolution. And we did talk about those a lot when they were in vogue, about how they were almost intentionally written to fail. Right. I still believe that the way they should be written is fully in terms of civil liability and purse string holding. Right. I do think a local government absolutely has the authority to give a cause of action to its residents, that if one of its servants does something, i.e. enforce a gun law, that it owes, you know, the person money damage. We did successfully get that put into one such sanctuary law, but it was in some place where it just wasn't likely to happen anyway.
Right. It's not going to get tested.
Yeah. The gun sanctuary movement, which first took off nationwide in 2018, had not yet faced a major legal challenge. The ruling will have wide implications in Oregon. State Attorney General has sued 2 other counties that declared themselves sanctuaries. One of those counties eventually rescinded.
The federal government's currently in a lawsuit with the entire state of Missouri for declaring itself a sanctuary, correct? That's still ongoing?
Well, yeah, they didn't do it right, though.
That's true.
They went a little too hard.
Right. They did go pretty hard, but that's big. We like that.
Yeah. Today's opinion by the Court of Appeals makes it clear that common sense requirements like safe storage and background checks apply throughout Oregon, the Attorney General Ellen Rosenblum said. Hopefully other counties with similar measures on the books will see the writing on the wall.
It's just mind-bogglingly stupid. The Oregon measure that banned everything ever and did all the bad stuff, it's still injunctionified, right? I believe like Oregon's the ballot measure they had that banned everything and then made it so you had to get a license to buy guns and stuff. It's still strung up by an injunction, right?
I don't remember. I don't want to say yes or no, but I think so.
I think it is, but like it's weird that like their anti-gun attorney general is like beating their chest over getting rid of a nothing when like the big objectionable thing, that the reason that these Second Amendment sanctuary counties would exist, like they've already won that battle, goofball.
Right. Well, another interesting point in gun control, right? What do you think of when you see a gun law in a southern state?
Racism?
Oops, sorry, smashed my microphone. Maybe. Well, North Carolina has a pistol permit purchase system where you need to get permission from your local cops, and it's like a rubber stamp thing to buy a new pistol.
It's a really gross law.
Well, it is really well known why it was passed.
Yeah.
It was because it had a good moral character requirement.
Which flavor of people have good moral character? Oh, I don't know.
Yeah,
it could be anyone.
Yeah, it could be anyone. Anyone could be moral as long as they are not a little, brown.
Yeah, of course.
So that's like actually why it was done. Like it's provable. Yes. You know it, right? Like all of the history is clear on it.
Well, that and Jim Bob, because nobody likes Jim Bob. He's white though, but nobody likes him, so he can't have a gun. Fuck him.
Well, listen, North Carolina politics are ablaze. Gun safety advocates say the North Carolina gun purchase permit system is the gold standard.
What the fuck?
Others want to see it repealed.
What?
Yeah.
This is the hill to die on?
Want to get rid of the current process, but opponents of the change say the move could be dangerous.
Incredible.
As part of broader firearms bill, some North Carolina lawmakers want to do away with the current pistol permit purchasing process. I couldn't say that.
Dang.
It would essentially remove the involvement of local sheriff's departments when it comes to issuing permits for people who want to buy handguns. However, some groups say removing this requirement raises several safety concerns, saying the system saves lives.
Does it?
Oh yeah, we have a great quote from a expert. That's Aprilia Warren, a first-year law student at UNC Chapel Hill and a volunteer at A Better Chance, A Better Community. And I will have you know, UNC Chapel Hill is one of the law schools in the United States. So Aprilia Warren says gun violence survivors and gun violence victims all have one thing in common. They want laws to stay in place to prevent future homicides.
What laws meant to keep who from doing what?
Yeah, and then Marcus Bass, Deputy Director of North Carolina Black Alliance, is among those speaking out. And again, remember the origin of this law. And this is the director of the North Carolina Black Alliance. I'll proceed. Taking the authority out of the hands of local sheriffs makes no sense, especially with the rise of gun violence across North Carolina. Our law enforcement officers are more likely to be able to identify individuals in communities who are real threats, and individuals could be a threat to themselves.
What the fuck?
That's really big.
Dude,
this is like actually
mind-numbing.
This is like comedy.
Like after our whole summer of defunding the police and all that, it's very interesting to see the usual characters all of a sudden like they go and switch disguises, and they're like, actually the cops are the best and most good guys that ever lived, and they should be the ones who say if you get a gun, because the cops are good and they would never abuse their power.
Right.
Like they would straight up watch watch like the Nichols murder video or whatever, and they'll be sitting there nodding their heads going, these guys should decide if you get to own a gun.
And remember, like, this wouldn't eliminate the NICS check.
Right.
And then, look what they bury here.
Checks.
Look what they bury all the way down here. After all these years, almost 104 years, this process is still in place. And people used to use this permitting process for very bad reasons.
Huh. What would those reasons
it should
be?
Repealed. Hey, hold on. 104. Do something real quick.
Yeah. Bust out that calculator real quick.
By the way, they're our greatest ally.
1919 is what I'm getting.
1919.
That's a good gun.
23 minus 104. 104. Okay, 1919. Let's check this. It'll say 1919, and let's put in a search term. Civil rights in North Carolina in 1919.
Huh.
Though they passed suffrage that prevented most African Americans from voting. That's something. And a multi-part all right, yeah, no, that's a coincidence. It has nothing to do with anything. I wouldn't worry about it.
They were full people. Trust us, for sure.
Anyway, real quick, guys, I would like to just say, as some of you know, Fudbusters has partnered with Second Amendment Foundation. And I would just like to say really quick that for nearly 50 years, the Second Amendment Foundation has been fighting for your Second Amendment rights. Having been involved in over 250 cases and an active litigation load of over 40 lawsuits, Second Amendment Foundation has the expertise and experience necessary to fight government overreach and challenge unconstitutional ban. SAF, winning firearms freedoms one lawsuit at a time. To learn more or donate, click the link in the descriptions, which is bit.ly, that's bit.ly/SAF Busters. If you don't want to do whatever, do that. SAF is a nice guy. They ain't done me wrong. Next up.
That good, huh?
Remember what we were talking about earlier? Was it
how earlier? Yeah.
Automatic found in Metro Atlanta almost daily, ATF says. God, I hate news websites so much.
It's obnoxious.
Horrible. There we go. Atlanta. It's a normal gun, but a device the size of a Lego allows to fire all the bullets inside with just one pull of the trigger.
Ordinarily, guns themselves only have like room for one bullet inside, unless it's like a side-by-side shotgun.
I wouldn't worry about that. It's called a switch, and Channel 2 Action News has learned that they're turning up all over Metro Atlanta. Switches are easy to find online and in pop culture. Some of the most popular hip-hop artists rap about them. For Nick with a drum, a Glock with a switch. raps PGF Nuck in Glock with a switch.
A classic.
They got so many. They are the subject of countless rap songs. We pop out with them Glocks. Now everybody got switches. Raps Little Dirk in No Interviews. Switches on me. All face shots. We changing dental plans, brah.
That's wonderful, actually. I'm glad they included that to help level set.
Yeah. Should have switched and fired.
In 2 seconds, they can fire 40 bullets. Dang.
Crazy. Took like 2 seconds. Yeah. All right, whatever. This is where a lot of those untraceable firearms are showing up.
Yeah, the gist of this is that there was a flood of these switches made in China. Starting as far as I can tell, like 2016, 2018 is when they first started showing up. And most people just assumed it was like an obvious Fed trap. But it turns out it wasn't, in that people bought in large numbers, imported large numbers of these switches under the guise of like they were airsoft conversion things. And there are airsoft Glocks that have trigger mechanisms much like actual Glocks that can use these devices that makes them full auto. So like they at least had that legitimate purpose, but then also with some or no modification at all, you could put them on a real Glock and it would work as a machine gun conversion. And so a massive number of these were imported. There was an ATF seminar that they let the public listen in on, and I think they were estimating over 500,000 imported, but the number's way higher than that. Like there's 500,000 that they found records at customs of, that it's like, yes, this shipment admitted it had a bunch of Glock switches inside. Right. So there's tons of these things on the street, like 500,000 plus, and they would be imported into cities and then sold in sort of like the underground black market gun dealings that goes on in cities. So what with street gangs and the sale of drugs and stuff, guns are contraband as well, and now you can sell machine guns. And so
like literally, who cares? In for a penny, in for a pound.
Right. And so cities are now quite full of these. With I know Chicago was saying that they'd recovered like 5,000 or 6,000 of them last year, which is a lot, especially when you consider like if you look back to like the earlier 2000s, I think they were also saying on this ATF seminar, like they would find maybe a couple, like it was 3 digits, maybe low 4 digits of machine guns a year. And now they're finding that a month in just one city. It's like there's a massive flood of illegal machine guns. And so it's kind of funny because all it took for regulation of machine guns to more or less intentionally turn inside out is people to stop caring. Right. Like the sorts of people who are like, wait, that's illegal, don't care, or that's illegal, cool, I want one. And that sort of took a chunk out of that. And what I'm interested in seeing, I'm not aware of any of these cases yet, but I'm interested in one of these people who get caught with a switch having their public defender argue Bruin instead of them just taking because most of the time they take a plea deal and they get like somewhere between 0 and 5 years for having the switch, and then they're back out. I want to have one of them get a public defender and go like, yeah, we're going to fight it. Because
public defenders are pretty big. I'd actually helped out a public defender once that actually did overturn a machine gun conviction.
A lot of these big things that are like chipping away at 922K, like the controlled substances, the marijuana thing. That was a public defender who worked that magic, and by worked magic, not to denigrate what they've done, because that's great, but like they just sort of say like we should apply Bruin here, and then the state fails it. The state fails their their burden is to prove that arms are implicated. Clearly, arms are implicated, and so then the state has to prove that there's a text, history, and tradition of these regulations, and there just isn't.
Right.
And I think the domestic abuser one, which is like massively understood. I don't know if we talked about that last time, but people who have domestic violence restraining orders that haven't been convicted or arrested of anything. So there's no actual evidence it happened, but there's a restraining order against them. Like enough evidence to get a restraining order is somebody's word against somebody's word.
Yeah, which is literally just they said you did it because their judges are way too scared to not grant them, because then they'll be the one. Yeah, no, it's
like the blood is on their hands or whatever. Something goes wrong. So a court found that people subject to such a restraining order where there is no real evidence beyond, because if there's actual evidence, right? If there's evidence you've domestically abused somebody, you will get charged with it or should be charged with it. If there's no evidence, you can still catch a restraining order though. And so,
well, wasn't there also, and then also the the Lautenberg amendments, right? Which where it prohibits people who are convicted of domestic violence misdemeanors.
Yes.
Those are certainly under question as well. So it is being actively chipped away.
And
so
it's public defenders doing a lot of it. And I think that is awesome.
Yeah, that's cool. Public defenders.
Good job. Anytime you find somebody who's willing to let you go for it, just show up in court and go Bruin and then sit back down. I'm a rat paralegal. Trust me. Just get me in there. I can do it for you. I'll just say Bruin and sit down. Squeak, squeak. All right. Bruin, Your Honor.
So you know how the next story, you know how like you go to a VFW or whatever, and they've got.
I do that all the time.
Yeah, we love hanging out there. They've got
playing
decommissioned
pool,
old weapons, right?
throwing darts.
Well, so at a Marine base in New York, Long Island, I think.
Did they have a DWAT?
There was a DWAT MG08 on the roof.
Great. That's great.
A DWAT MG08 on the roof.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it was stolen. Yeah, the heavy gun worth approximately $20,000, press X to doubt, appears to have vanished over the weekend.
Was it like on the roof, like exposed to the elements?
Yes. A strange crime has people on Long Island scratching their heads, wondering who would steal a piece of antique machinery.
Anybody who knows what it is.
Well, police say a World War I German MG08 machine gun has gone missing. The device was stolen from the Suffolk County detachment of the Marine Corps in Bayshore, just off Sunrise Highway. It was originally out front, but we decided to put it on the roof because we thought somebody would steal it. Air Force veteran Anthony Ciano said Monday. The vets believe that whoever did this came prepared, considering that the thieves went through in order to bring down more than 100 pounds of metal from a rooftop. Yeah.
The transferable. Well, of course, this is effectively a transferable MG08 if it's actually a DWAT.
Well, no, but if you don't have the papers, then
that's true.
The government owns it.
That's true.
So it's a parts kit, effectively.
Right.
Yeah. So military armaments historian Dan Templeman with the Museum of American Armor says the stolen weapon has gone through a decommission process, which makes it inoperable and lacks value without a registered background.
Without
so that means
papers.
It's a DWAT. Yeah.
Right.
But MG08s, mostly MG08 15s, are actually one of the most common machine guns on the registry.
And transferable ones, I think at least pre-COVID, they were like 15 grand, right?
Even less. They were like 8 to 10,000. And so a DWATted MG08, well, I guess because it's not an 0815, might be worth a little more, but
not 20.
Yeah, not
especially not if it's been outside.
Yeah, been outside for all this time in New York, so it's cotton. It's got like a lot of
snow and ice and salt and New York. It's got New York on it. Gross. No, stuff in New York.
It's foul. Speaking of whatever it is, wow, MAF Corporation. Look at that.
Whoa.
Tack chimes back in stock.
You can hang those outside on your New York.
$229.99. There is a lot of good stuff. There is whatever you want in there. We're doing everything. You can get the cheap thing. Look at the upper. It's inexpensive. There's stickers and the Magic ATF ball and the shirt. There's so many things that are available for sale. And they even also have regular edition. M4
normal flavor.
Yep, regular edition.
They brought back the original recipe Butterfinger.
Yeah, we did. I found them in a box. Complete LPKs, best deals you're going to find, guys. It's going to be on MAF Corporation, and it helps keep us alive. So go to MAF Corporation, use promotional code FRN, that's Foxtrot Romeo November, and you will get a discount. Discount will be applied to your order, okay? So go on there. All right, well, so next up, we've got something a little somber. We've got something somber, and then we're going to end it with a nice story.
Nice story.
So the Michigan State University shooting, 3 students and a suspect killed. I'm not sure how suspicious he is at that point. It seems pretty transparent what happened.
Right.
But so what happened was a 43-year-old guy, not related to the school at all, it seems.
I don't think anybody's stated a motive yet, but man, this is not one that I would guess at. So
absolutely no idea about a motive. Yep.
He had two handguns and shot the two handguns and killed people with them, of course. Yep. And the response to the shooting has been calls to ban assault weapons.
Yes.
But the thing about this shooting that's like sort of rubbed me, of course, right?
People. Well, it's kind of like Virginia Tech, but like luckily much less.
Right. Of course, people getting shot rubs me the wrong way. But
right.
This guy had a prior conviction for carrying, for illegal carrying of a handgun.
Right.
And so essentially like carrying without a permit. And so a bunch of pro-gun people latched onto this saying, well, he should have had a felony and he shouldn't have been in possession of guns at all. Like sort of alleging that because he broke a possession of a gun law, a non-violent possession of a gun law, for which he served 18 months in jail, they're saying that he shouldn't have been able to buy a gun afterwards, as though anybody with that sort of background should be barred from owning a gun.
Right.
Which I think is an insane thing to say. I've heard one person clearly communicate that they're not saying that everybody with that sort of background shouldn't have a gun. They're saying that the insanity of Michigan's state laws would ban him from having that gun, and he's still able to get one and do something awful. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm with you there, right? Like clearly gun laws didn't keep anybody safe. But the way that your messaging sounds is you think that Michigan's requirement for a carry license is good and that anybody who breaks it shouldn't be able to own or carry a gun, which I think is this probably the stupidest possible way to go about this.
Yeah, and he had ties to a township in New Jersey. He had written a note saying that he was going to attack schools there. It's clearly very weird. But yeah, no, so that's terrible. Horrible what happened. I did see that all the students went to the state capitol building, sat down outside of it, which was funny because the article said they stood up for gun violence prevention, and it was a sit-down protest.
It was a sit-down.
Which is funny. And again, yes, demanding restriction, like more background checks, restrictions on assault weapons and everything like that. And it's just like the shark has been jumped at this point. I don't know how much more there is to say about it.
Especially like with California having those two shootings where both people used guns that were violative or not registered, at some rate violated California's laws on these sorts of things. And then California renews their calls for things that would ban things that had nothing to do with these shootings. Now more than ever, it's painfully clear, especially in light of Bruin, like we talked about earlier. They're no longer trying to make it seem like they're like, oh, but this tragedy is why we must act. It's like, we must act, and this tragedy is what we're going to use to scare people into doing it, which is, of course, gross and not good. But like they're not even making any attempt to hide it.
Yep. It's awful. It's so weird. We could have a conversation, an actual conversation about destigmatizing mental health treatment. That isn't just Republicans saying we should lock anyone who's, a little mentally different in a cage, right?
Right.
No, we don't want to have. It's funny. There was a comic strip. Here are some things that would actually prevent violent crime, and the person takes the paper, sets it on favor, and says, "I don't want to stop violent crime. I want to ban guns."
Right. And it was there was one of these one of these Everytown Giffords founded pro-gun quote unquote groups was talking about the Michigan shooting, and the thought that struck me, because they're saying like, oh, clearly there's compromise. We should compromise on assault weapons. That would stop more things like this from happening, despite this not using an assault weapon. But the thought that struck me is that like the time for conversation is drawing closer and closer to an end with the way that the courts are starting to decide these cases, where it's like your time to have meaningful conversation here draws thinner and thinner the more political capital you spend not trying to solve problems, but instead trying to ban broad categories of guns that won't actually prevent this from happening. Because like probably like around 2008 to 2012 era, had they traded universal background checks for an easing of the NFA, they totally could have rammed that straight through. It would have been favored by both sides and went it straight through. As we're post Bruin world, like maybe like now is their chance. Now is the one time they could trade background checks for they get rid of SBRs from the NFA. They could maybe get it now, but
I would take that deal.
If these I wouldn't probably take it now because with the whole pistol brace fiasco,
yeah, we're gonna win.
Maybe we get rid of SBRs for free. We don't have to trade anything for it. So maybe we're able to claw stuff back on our own, and we don't have to compromise things. And we've learned that the other side is bad actors, and they'll never compromise in good faith. And so they've sort of like squandered their opportunity. And with Bruin being on our side, they may have lost their shot entirely for like the next serious amount of time.
Yeah, I think it's just going to be a war of attrition going back and forth. So before we talk about our last story, there was one thing that was making the news, and it was a mugshot posted on Twitter. Mugshotties. Possession of a machine gun, possession of a silencer, and possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute.
That's the supposedly I talked with some people who knew some things. Supposedly this is a FaceApp face and the story is faked. But they couldn't find any sort of record that would match this as you can usually do. But
and look at the blurs, it's a bit
right. And like if you look at the face, it's uncanny and it looks like the notarealperson.com generated faces all look like that.
Right.
They have that like that weird smoothness that just isn't human.
Yeah,
like the uncanny valley thing, where like you're more able to tell that something that's just slightly not quite right is very obviously not right.
Don't care if she's a robot honeypot. Oh man, that's great. Finally, a story from Florida. Florida woman waved loaded gun at McDonald's drive-thru over free cooking.
Would you not? This should not be a crime.
Bro, this is right in my backyard. Hold on. Let's look up this for Amari.
She's perfect. See if you can get her details. Go hit her up.
Oh no. No, that's okay. But anyway, of Altamont Springs near Orlando, was booked into the Seminole County Jail. She faces several charges, including aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, improper exhibit of a firearm. She didn't brandish it right. Battery causing bodily harm and resisting an officer. A McDonald's employee told police that Hendricks was mad that no one asked if she was using the fast food restaurant's rewards program and thought she was entitled to a free cookie. According to the report, employees actually did give her the free cookie, but she was still agitated and continued yelling.
I would be. You shouldn't have to ask.
The worker told the officers that Hendricks then grabbed a black handgun, inserted a magazine, and proceeded to rack the slide.
What's that? Like condition negative. The higher numbers are the more quote unquote safe conditions. Like this is like condition 12. Like put your bullets in the magazine, put the magazine in the gun.
Right. The employee said she heard 2 click sounds associated with someone chambering around. Hendricks then allegedly forced herself inside the restaurant after employees locked down, at which point she repeatedly struck one employee and forced him out of the building. This is not the first time a disagreement over a fast food order has led to a firearm incident. Last year, a 16-year-old boy working at Wendy's was shot in the head by a customer who was angry the restaurant was out of barbecue sauce. And in 2018, a teenage McDonald's customer in Tennessee pulled a gun on a worker who pushed back after his companion called him a racial slur. That is some pure Southern energy. All of those stories. That's awful. Okay.
Wow.
So yeah, that is just terrible. Also, that's an airsoft gun.
Yeah, I was about to say that rifling is
that rifling is not rifling.
Very bold.
And there's also a cool seam on the top and bottom of the barrel.
Yeah.
Why is like every like stock news image of a gun an airsoft gun?
Because you can buy guns easier than getting a book in this country. Obama said so.
That's true. All right. Last up, Patriot Patch Company. You boys ready for the latest drop? It's going to be big. Patriot Patch Company is a longtime supporter of the show. We have a custom coupon code. Oh. And what a nice little patch. This would have arrived just in time for Valentine's Day for y'all. It's Seeking Love. It's the camera is not going to focus because it has a problem. Seeking Love, and it is a
Javelin.
Yeah, it is a javelin. I'm gonna take off that thing. ASMR mode there.
I'm tingled up, bro.
Yeah, there you go. Seeking Love. And I don't get to usually show this, but when you're in the Patch of the Month Club, you get the little artwork, you get the line art, and a stinker of the patch every time. It's great. You join Patriot Patch Company. The coupon code is TWIG10, TWIG10, and you will get all of the latest things. As we say, Patch of the Month Club. It renews every month. Get your 10% off. Get a cool, fun little patch every month. It's a great little, thing to make you feel better, right? It's a little serotonin bump when it comes in. You can also get a gun cleaning mat, which I use. You can get one with either a good gun on it or a bad gun.
AK-47.
Yeah.
Such as the 1911.
Yeah, bad gun such as the 1911, or a good gun because such as the AKR AM47A74. Factory one. $16.99. So guys, check it out. patriotpatch.co. All right. That's all there is. Anything you want to tell the audience before we go, Mr. Ibon?
Oh, I guess since we always like dovetail in at the very end the update on the Li Noise thing.
Okay.
So the one interesting thing that happened that I know that we had a couple theories about was the judge. I think last time we'd said that the state was trying to judge shop, and the judge, whatever judge is in charge of that decision, didn't like that, and so they put all four of the cases in front of the judge that's good, for the pro gun side. And then that judge asked in all four cases for the state to provide an illustrative example of each and every item banned under this law. Which, in my mind, I want that judge to then mean that the state has to provide one of all of like the 200 guns that they listed as being banned. That would just be funny if they had to find an example of each of them. But probably what that means is like they just want like one assault weapon, so they could bring the AR-15 and one assault pistol and one assault shotgun to sort of like give examples. And I know
I do wonder. It seems like it could be a vagueness trap.
Yeah, your theory, I know, and after you explained it, I think I tend to agree that makes sense. Is that surely the judge can see where this is headed, and that sees the way this law is written already is overly broad, and so he may be wanting to like have that battle fought in this first round of preliminary injunctioning. So he may be jumping the shark, but I guess it's something he's able to do where before there's any arguments about if this is overly broad, he can be like, I think it is. Let's see if the state can prove my theory on accident. And so the lawsuits are not. There was, I think it was the Illinois State Rifle Association decided to like randomly put out a press release saying that the four cases had all been like, what's the name whenever they're all put together and they become one mega case? Whatever that made up legal word is.
Isn't it joined?
Yeah, they'd all been put together. I forget what it is, but he said that the Illinois State Rifle Association said that all four cases had been joined together, right? So that the judge was only going to be hearing one case. But this is not true. It's completely wrong. The judge himself in an order explicitly said he is going to be hearing four separate cases, four separate motions for preliminary injunction at this point. He says they will probably join the cases later, but at this point, they are not joined because they have some distinct elements. And so he's going to be hearing four separate motions for preliminary injunction, which is good because only one of them has to stick. And of course, I imagine he'll rule the same way on all of them. I doubt there'll be a big split because three of them are the exact same arguments and only one of them has like different and unique arguments. But the gist of it is the state is going to reply to these, the state's going to explain why they think that the law is good. And the state's explanation is due in all four cases on March 2nd. And after that point, the judge has a variety of options. He could just grant the preliminary injunctions, or he could say, well, I want more information and I want more replies and stuff. But probably
consolidate, by the way.
Consolidate, that's the one. So the state cases are not
consolidate or joining. Yeah.
But the thing to look out for if this is something that's got your your knickers in a bunch is here in the next the next first or second week of March will be the sort of time to watch out for. With the 2nd of March, the state will drop their reply. And then from that point, we may have injunctions drop, which would be cool.
Yeah.
But things are more or less pretty hopeful. And then
interested to see how the state reply goes.
Right. The timing on this is very interesting because in California, here in this next week or two, California is probably going to have Benitez knock California's 3 of California's laws. 2 of them I know are the assault weapon and magazine, and I can't remember what the third one is, but California's gun laws are about to get struck. Mm-hmm. And of course that'll get appealed and probably reversed. But I think in California, Rifle and Pistol Association lawyers are helping out on the Illinois lawsuit, and I think the reason why is there's some there's some good like normally the gun rights groups will try and bicker and fight with each other to be me first,
right?
But I think there's some smart tactics going on here where I think what they're banking on, like if both courts find at appeal that the laws go away, that's great for us, right? Mm-hmm. But if you get only one of the courts at appeal to say the law goes away, you now have a split in appeals courts.
Right.
Which is something that the Supreme Court will start watching very, very closely because they don't like when that happens, when 2 different districts on appeal find 2 different things. That shouldn't happen. And so I think it's smart and awesome of the California lawyers who are very experienced fighting this sort of nonsense because they've been doing it forever.
Yeah, it's like all they do.
I think it's very cool of them lending their expertise here because I think they see a way that can help them out and help everybody out, potentially, depending on how hard these states want to fight these laws. So it's cool. And I want to give a shout out to them because I think they're cool.
That's big. Well, anyways, guys, for the good of the order, I will see you next time.
That's true.